Jamie here. Welcome to Satellite Stories, where we interview those who have encountered Jesus through video games and nerd culture. We are part of the LTN Podcast Network, and today we're going to hear another story. Hey, I am so excited to share another story of mine. It's been since season 1 that I talked to you solo, and I'm excited to do it again. I know that there are a lot of stories out there, but I am feeling particularly selfish this week as my favorite childhood game, well, my favorite campaign-based game, so storyline game, was remastered. Okay, if you don't know what that means, basically it means it's a really old game that had graphics that were not up to today's standard, and the developer decided to remaster that game, to rebuild it using some newer features. Now, a remaster does not mean they remake it or reboot it in some way, shape, or form. They stay true to the original game, but they add new things. It would be like taking a black and white movie and somehow adding color to it, or taking a movie that was maybe done with, I don't know, really maybe hard to see like artwork, and redoing some of the artwork with more modern technology. So it wouldn't be like, hey, let's change a line here, let's change this actor here, let's maybe add this cultural context here. It's the same exact story, the same exact game. They're just utilizing technology that we have now that we didn't have back then. So the game that I'm going to be talking about, the first thing is how to say it, okay? It's how to say it. Now, if this isn't your style of game, don't worry. I would love for you to bear with me. And I want to talk about how this game played a crucial part in my life. It played a crucial role in my life as a follower of Christ. So this game is traditionally called Suikoden. It's Suikoden. And I'm going to tell you the story of how I discovered this game, and then unpack why it means so much to me. Now, I call this game Suikoden, and I don't even say it right. It's a Japanese word. I have friends that know Japanese, and they've tried to get me to say it right forever and ever. Reality is, in America, we say Suikoden, okay? So Suikoden is my favorite childhood single-player game. It has been remastered, and here's the story of how I discovered this game. So I was walking through, I think it was a Fred Meyer. It was one of those grocery stores that also had games and electronics and toys, etc. So picture whatever the equivalent of that is in your neighborhood. And I was pretty young. I must have been in middle school. And I remember walking down the aisle with my grandmother, and we stumbled across an end cap. Now, you all know end caps can have the most random things on them, but this one had what we called PlayStation Greatest Hits. If you know, you know. PlayStation Greatest Hits were games that were the greatest games of all time, supposedly, that were being resold at a lower price in higher volume. So it would be a game that came out several years ago that was one of the, on the top 20 charts or top 50, however many they chose, I don't know. It was probably just a game that sold well. And this was now when that game basically got a price drop and was relabeled, and it had a green label on it that said Greatest Hits. So if you were a collector, you wouldn't really want a Greatest Hits copy. It meant that it wasn't like the first edition. It was like a second printing of the game. But if you were somebody that just wanted to play the game, this is a perfect opportunity for you to get a good deal on a game that was one of the greatest. So I stumble across this end cap, and there are so many games there. There's Final Fantasy, probably like, I don't know, probably some Tomb Raider games. There's all sorts of adventure games, and I'm seeing the PlayStation games, these PlayStation Greatest Hits, and I'm just drooling. And I'm like, okay, are there any games that I've really wanted over the last few years that have come out in greatest hits recently. And I'm looking through, and I don't really find anything that catches my eye. Most of the games, like, my friends have, and I can borrow them, or I've already played them, or I'm not sure if I'd actually be interested. And as I'm looking through, I stumble across this. Now, for those of you that do not have your camera, you're just listening via audio, I will explain what this is. It is a PlayStation game. It's a thicker case. Okay, it looks like it has 2 discs in it, but it only has one. I don't know why it's thicker, but I'm showing the inside of it now, and it's a black disc that's got all these cool logos on it, these emblems on it, these symbols. It's Suikoden. It's got some I think kanji on it, and it is very awkward fantasy art. Now I like it. It's got this like old school, like old D&D vibe where actually none of the characters that are on here are actually what they look like in the game. So I don't fully understand this artwork. There's a different cover where they look more anime style, like they look more like they look in the game. Now the game's not really an anime game, so I don't want to distract you too much from that. But it's this cool, like, high fantasy looking art. There's a guy with a bow on it. There's this dude with some skulls lifting his hands in the air. There's a couple people that look like they might be like wizards or something, and a dude riding a dragon in this tall tower in the middle of the ocean. And on the back, the main line says, "Enter an ancient world of bravery, mysticism, and romance." And as a middle school kid, I look up at my grandma and I'm like, "Grandma, how do you say that name?" And she said, "Suikoden? Suikoden, I think." I was like, "Can I get this?" And she said, "Sure, why not?" We read the back of it, and it sounds like something I would like, and take the game home, and I put it in and I start playing, and I fall in love with this game. I absolutely fall in love with it. And I go to school and I start talking to people about it, and they're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. That's like some cheap, dumb, game that nobody knows of. And I was like, okay, bummer. It's not Final Fantasy. It's not Tomb Raider. It's not Siphon Filter. It's not Metal Gear Solid. It's just some random cheap PlayStation game. And I'm like, well, I don't care. I like it. So I keep playing it. And the storyline, the way the characters develop, and I start falling in love with it. And these were the days of like Pokemon being really big, right? And in Pokemon, the catchphrase of Pokemon is "gotta catch 'em all." In this game, there are 108 playable characters, and it's in like a turn-based combat. It's what's called a JRPG style. It's a Japanese role-playing game, and it was turn-based. So kind of tactical. You think through things, you make decisions, but 108 playable characters. For a game like this, 10 playable characters would suffice. There were 108. So it was this like RPG style, like Final Fantasy, but you could also recruit a ton of characters, kind of like a Pokemon collecting them all sort of theme. And I remember beating the game and thinking, wow, that was great. And then hearing somehow like, okay, if what happens if you collect all the characters? And I think I look it up and I find this guide somewhere, and I don't really know how the internet works a lot. I don't think anybody did at the time, but I end up finding out that if you collect all the characters, the game operates a little differently. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And as you collect more characters, without a spoiler alert, like if you play games a lot and you care enough about the story, this is how games work, right? As you unlock more of the world, as you do more things, the game around you changes. And typically in video games, if you do what's called 100%ing them, means you complete literally everything. It's like a different type of ending. So I was like, there's a different ending if I collect all the characters. I'm doing that. And I do that, and my mind is blown. And I'm like, this is the coolest game ever. So I played the game for several years, and I beat it a couple times, and I go on the rest of my life to beat it a few times, and 100% it a couple times, and I'm like, well, this game's great. Well, I'm in high school and I'm talking about this game, and I'm talking about collecting characters in this castle, and they're like, "Are you talking about Suikoden?" And I'm like, "Suikoden? What are you talking about?" I'm talking about Suikoden. And I'm like, Suikode. And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Dude, that's called Suikoden." I'm like, "Really? Oh, is that really how you say it?" Anyway, but my mind is blown. Like, I don't care how you say it. Like, wait, you're telling me you know what this game is? And like, oh yeah, dude. It's like it's got this massive, like, what they call a cult following. It sounds terrible, but it basically just means like there's this niche group of people that absolutely love this game. Like, it may not be the world's biggest like AAA game and everyone knows it, but there's this following, there's this group of people that just love this game, and just they drool over it like, this is amazing. And I get exposed to this world where like people know what my favorite childhood like campaign based game is. Oh my goodness. And I kind of flip. I'm like, dude, this is amazing. And I start talking about it, and people know the characters that I'm talking about. They knew the characters I grew up with, and I start describing it, and I'm like, oh, you know who this person is. You know who Gremio is. You know who Pawn is. And I am just ecstatic because I finally have someone that I can talk to about this game, and it's not like one of my parents who's like, cool, bud. That's awesome. Like, yes, I love talking about Pokemon. I love talking about Final Fantasy. I love talking about World of Warcraft eventually when that came out. I love talking about these games that everyone plays. But to be able to talk about this like niche game that I thought I was the only one on the planet that played was just amazing. Now, I want to pause here and I want to rewind, and I'm going to get into a little bit of just some personal perspective on my life growing up. Now, I'm a very vulnerable person. Anybody that knows me is like, yep. I'm willing to share pretty much anything. I'm willing to share my struggles, my life, my pain. I have no problem sharing those things. Now, I will say that I'm going to share a little differently on this podcast, just because it is about other people and the role they played in my life. Where this video game comes in is it comes into like, it was an escape for me for a lot of things. And I'm not going to say that's good that it was an escape, but what I'm going to say is when I was a kid and I played this game, I didn't realize that it wasn't good that I was escaping to a video game, and the Lord really, really redeemed it. So, getting into Jamie's childhood a little bit. I grew up in a split family, and that's a fairly common thing in today's day and age. And automatically, I relate to half of the humans on the planet because of that. And I was one of those kids. I didn't do like a every other weekend thing. I did a every other week thing, where I would live 1 week with my biological mom, 1 week with my dad, and my quote unquote stepmom. I don't refer to her as my stepmom. I've never referred to her as my stepmom. I just refer to her as my mom. So I lived with my mom and dad 1 week, and I lived with my biological mom the other week. And I want to say this now, like, I am on good terms with my mom and dad, with my biological mom, with all of my parents, and I want to honor all of them and say that I have a deep love for the role that they have all played in my life. There is infinite amount of grace, and by the time I became a teenager, like, I have to start owning some of my own stuff, right? And I'll say I was not a perfect teenager. I was not a perfect kid. I made a lot of mistakes, but reality is, when I was younger, there was a lot of confusion. I really lived two different lives. My dad's house. I'll say my dad's house and my bio mom's house. My dad's house, I it was a pretty traditional setting. I had mom and dad that loved Jesus, that as far as I knew, now I know there are financial challenges, but as far as I knew, I always had food to eat. I went to Christian school a lot of my life. Bills were paid, and I was never fearful of like what the next day or the next couple weeks was going to look like. It's just like I had a very stable childhood. It was very healthy. It was very much the norm and what to be expected. And without publicly throwing shade, it was not that every other week. Now, I knew that I was loved. I never questioned whether or not I was loved. I never questioned whether I was cared for. But it was not. I didn't have two parents at that house. I had one parent, and I knew she loved me very much, and I loved her very much. And I just think that this parent was in a different season, right? A different season, and it would be hard to say everything that I feel about this topic on a public podcast where anybody could listen to it. And I don't feel any shame, but I'd love to, if you hear something in my story you resonate with, just reach out to me. I'd love to share more details over a one-on-one call sometime, over messaging, and just kind of resonate with you. But there were a lot of struggles, and I will play devil's advocate here and say, like, I had a single mom, and I can't imagine how hard that was. I can't imagine. I could try, but I'm not a mom. I'm a dad. Two, I'm not a single parent. And three, I've also never raised a teenager, like not yet. I have a 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. I'm not at a teenager yet. So for so many reasons, I can't imagine the difficulties that my biological mother faced. I have no idea. And I remember just a lot of times her struggling to find a career, what she wanted to do with her life, her calling. And I imagine it was really, really tough for her. And it was again there was a lot of fun. Like, we played video games together. She kicked my butt at Tetris. She we had a lot of fun times. I think she really supported my gaming. She gamed herself, she played a lot of like computer games, and she had her own, relationship with video games for what it was. And she'd watch me play games and stuff, but I remember so many times where I just wanted to shut off my brain. And I remember not having the knowledge to like turn to Jesus in these moments. So I would just turn on this game. I would turn on Suikoden, and I would just play it. And I would imagine myself being these characters, imagine myself being the heroes. I would try to correlate like certain characters. I mean, there's 108 of them being like different Bible characters. And I would think like, oh, which one am I most like? And on depressed days, I was more like this characters. On confident days, I was more like, these characters. On confident days, I was more like these characters. On sad days, I was like these characters. And I just remember getting to emotional parts of the story and just bawling. I mean, just bawling. And yeah, like, there's some sad stuff that happens in the game. It's a good game. Like, it's worth picking up. It's worth trying, especially now there's a remaster. You play games, you should try it. If you don't play games, you should still try it. But I just remember just bawling. And it was like I needed an excuse to just cry. And what happened in this game was like, it was just that. Like, I'm crying because of what's happening in this video game. Now, I was crying about everything else in my life. This just gave me a reason to do it. Right? It's like I had this big cry in me, and like when these specific things happen in this game, it just all came out. Now, I don't want to get carried away talking about my childhood, and again, that's a topic that I'm so excited to be able to share with people, and the challenges that I faced, and to say now that I'm on good terms with all three of my parents is it's a pretty rad thing. I think that people that grow up in a normal situation don't always get to say they have a good relationship with their parents. And I would say there's a lot of improvement to do. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of recovering to do. And there were years where I didn't have a great relationship. But I'm working on that now, right? And it's been this challenge, but this game, every time I would pick it up and play it as an adult, I would have the nostalgia of like this just like broken kid that like didn't know how to cope and would just lean on a game. And playing this game as an adult was just like, oh my gosh, I survived that. Like I made it out of that. There could be a world where like playing it as an adult gave me like PTSD or something, but that wasn't the world for me. And playing through this game has, over the years, it's been something that has really been, it's been a reminder for me. So I think of when the Israelites, I wish I would have pulled this scripture up, but this is what I'm thinking about right now. I'm thinking about when the Israelites, they crossed the Jordan River, right? So at one point they cross the Red Sea with Moses. At another point, they cross the Jordan. And in this story, they are crossing the Jordan with Joshua, right? So this is like a new season in their life. They cross over the Jordan with Joshua. And when they cross over the Jordan, they do this really cool thing where they stack rocks. They stack rocks as an indicator of like, hey, we made it through this season. We made it through this. We made it through this river. So in Joshua 4, it's Joshua 4. God instructed them to take 12 stones from the riverbed and set them up as a memorial, a sign for future generations to remember God's mighty hand. And I know this might seem a little silly. I mean, hey, let's be honest. They stacked rocks. They stacked stones. Okay. That's not silly. It's symbolic and it's beautiful. But this game for me, this character, this is the main character. His last name is McDowell. This game for me is like, it's kind of like a memorial. And I think we can get caught away with symbolism. I think we can get distracted by symbolism a lot of times, but I think God used symbolism in Joshua 4 with the Israelites. And for me, man, this was just a beautiful way of saying like, I made it through childhood. And look, there are people that just had it so much worse than I did. I think I have this unique perspective where like, I have this broken perspective of what upbringing looks like, but like I also have a really good, healthy perspective of what it looked like. I experienced kind of two different lives, so to speak. And I don't want to overshare on that because it's not just my story to tell, and I don't want to just paint this bad picture of somebody. But like it was brutal. Like the things that I remember, and maybe what I remember is just the worst things, right? Maybe I don't remember the average. There were a lot of good things. Like there were some really fun moments. But the ones that I remember the most are the worst ones. It's like the most painful memories of this half of my childhood. Those are the ones that stick out to me the most. But every time I pick up this game and I play through it, it's like looking at the stones that Israel looked at after they crossed the Jordan, and they just said like, man, you remember that time when like, man, God brought us out of Egypt and he brought us into the promised land and he helped us cross that river on dry land. You remember that? And I imagine like Israel and the priests and all the different tribes would come together and maybe look at those stones or reminisce on those stones or talk about those stones. And the kids would be like, oh, that's cool. Tell me about that time where you guys did that. Was it really dry? Was it like, what happened to the fish? Like, did it just like create a dam? Did all the water stop? Like, did the water go somewhere else? Did it just fly in the air? Could you see the fishes swimming through? What happened? Like, explain. I would want to, was it 100% dry, or is that just like, do you just say that it was dry to like imply like, or is it just like you didn't even, there was no mud because all the water was gone? Explain that to me. Like, imagine the children asking, the children want to know, what was that like? What was that like? What was that like? Now, as I say this next part, we cannot remake and replay what happened at the Jordan River. We can't do that. But imagine if the old fogies in Israel could take those kids back to Egypt and just to be a fly on the wall, not to actually experience slavery, right? But to walk them across the Red Sea, to help them wander the desert, to help them see the experience, all the pain, and then bring them to the Jordan and have them experience what it was like to cross the Jordan River and place those stones on the ground. For me, this game, as silly as it sounds, being remastered and being put into something that's actually worth playing now, because for so many people, I wouldn't recommend playing this old game. Actually, I would, because I think it's great. But like, there's some broken things with it. The UI wasn't great. The audio clips were bad sometimes. The effects weren't fabulous. The UI is like what it looks like, the buttons you push and stuff. The user interface, the user experience wasn't always great. But now with it being remastered, it's like I can tell people, hey, it's in a little better shape and it's accessible. It's not a PlayStation game that you have to buy for $100 because now it's a collectible, or something you have to illegally pirate. Now you can buy Suikoden 1 and 2 HD Remaster for $50 and you can replay like the game that like helped bring me through my childhood. Now before we get carried away here, I'm not saying that this game replaced Jesus. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that I think there is a way that Jesus came alongside of me in that time, because there were a lot of things about Jesus that I didn't understand. And I think God knew that. Like, I couldn't quite understand fully what eternity meant. And I still don't, but I didn't quite understand what it meant that like Jesus did this radical thing for me, that is dying on the cross and saved me from my sins. So when I'm broken and when I'm hurting, I can rely on him and his word. But I think God knew what I could do is I could play games. And I could enjoy games. And he knew that, yeah, this is a game. And yeah, the Jordan River, those are stones. But he knew that what was happening was he was kind of creating a memorial for me. A key moment in my life where, because I didn't understand theology too well. I didn't understand what it meant to rest in the promises of God, to lean on him. And maybe that's to my fault, right? Maybe I wasn't attentive enough as a middle schooler. I had a relationship with Jesus, but it was still forming, and it's still forming today, but I didn't have what I have now. And that is this life of experience and seeing, like, man, when I'm just broken and hurting, I can look and see all the ways that God has pulled me through. And when I was a kid, I didn't have that. I didn't have life experience to look at and to reminisce on all the times God had saved me. And I think this was kind of like it was like a lifeline for me. You know, I was like, God threw it out to me and he's like, hey, I know you don't understand my word. But I'm going to give you just a little bit of a distraction for now. And later on, when you look at that distraction, I want you to try to find me in it. I believe God uses art to move the hearts of people. I believe he uses music to move the hearts of people. And this story is a beautiful story, and I believe that it is an art form. And that might sound silly to those of you that aren't gamers, but please hear me. I think that art can change people. I think music can change people, and I think that's because God uses those tools for his good and for his glory. It's not because that art has something. It's not because that music does something. There's no power in the art. There's no power in the music. There's no power in this game. But I think God can use it as a redeeming tool in our lives. So now, to recommend this game and to watch people play it, yes, it's them enjoying a fun game that I really like. Let's not over, over symbolize this here. It's just a amazing freaking game, and I think you should play it. Okay, let me just say that. But there's this sentimental part of me that just goes, man, now people get to experience this really cool story that it meant something to me. It meant something to me. And this story is not what is powerful. It's how Jesus used it in my life. So I had the great privilege of and the great opportunity. I want to say big shout out to the team at Satellite Gaming. Big shout out to my wife. One of my coworkers, he called this Suikoden Day. He said when I announced that I was taking time off for this game, for this release, the moment they had an actual release date, which they had a couple times, I would request 2 days off of work. Like, I'm taking this day and this day off, the day it launches and the day after. And that Saturday, I told my wife, like, I would love to just like basically have like just time to just play through this entire game. And our team was like, yeah, do it. So finally they announced the date, March 6, 2025. And I took off 2 days to play this game, and I was planning on playing it on a Saturday as well. And I reached out to a buddy who I knew maybe needed a distraction of his own. And I said, hey, bro, this game came out. Would you play through it with me? He's like, yeah, I'll do that. So we actually live streamed for like, I don't want to say 2 days straight, because it wasn't 2 days straight. We took breaks. We slept. We ate. I took a walk with my daughter both days. But I played, this is the most I've gamed in a long, very, very long time. I took off 2 days to play through this entire game, and total clocked hours, it was like 22 to 23 hours. But like, not counting the time where we would pause it and just talk and just to hang out with people in the chat. We probably streamed for like 30 hours over the course of 2 days. And it was a blast. And at the end of it, I was able to just ask him like, hey, what'd you think of the game? And we 100%ed it, right? So we got to see the cool ending. And I was like, what'd you think? And he's like, dude, I actually really liked it a lot. This was fun. This is great. And we're done. We're tired. We're exhausted. We end the stream. We tell everybody good night. And I sent him a text. And I'm not going to read the details of it, but I basically just said like, hey man, like, I didn't share this with you while we were playing, but like, this game, it got me through a lot as a kid. And I know that sounds silly, but like, thanks for just like kind of reliving my childhood and helping me like reminisce on a season that like, I don't have to be in anymore. I don't have to be in that season anymore. This isn't like PTSD for me. This is a memorial, And again, I want to keep reiterating, there's no power in this game. But I think there is power in what Jesus can do in our hearts and in our lives through things that we encounter in life, particularly in art. And as I'm sharing that with him, he responded and he said, it's really cool to hear you say that this is a game you needed when you were a kid. He's like, because I think I kind of needed that right now. And I'm like, dude, that's so rad, and I don't want to share his story here. That's not what this is about, but it is to say that like, I think he and I just needed that weekend, me to remember and him to be able to just play through a rad game, be with a bro, just have a good time, but also capture that little bit of sentiment there that just said like, this is a memorial for you. And I think it was a little bit of a distraction for me. And I think it's a healthy distraction. We ended up talking about scripture. We're talking about a sermon that I was preparing for that I gave this last Sunday. And we were talking about just being dads and being followers of Christ and showing up and priorities. And it was just such a good, rich time. And I would say that he and I, we grew closer from that time, just being together. It was kind of like a retreat of sorts, like, yeah, we played a game, but the amount of times we talked about scripture, that we talked about what Jesus was going on in our lives. And at one point he's like, hey, he was like respecting the fact that like we had people watching. And although it wasn't advertised or promoted as a Christian stream, he did ask, like, hey, are you cool if I ask a theological question? And he did. And I was like, yeah, dude, of course. And we're sitting there talking about these theological questions. And I know that there are people in the chat that like are not Christians, but they're hanging out for it. They're watching, they're listening. I hope they were taking notes. And for us to be able to do that, and I know that's how people do their ministry every day, is with live streaming. That this is not something that I have built into how I do ministry. And it's for nothing other than there's already people doing that, and they're doing it really well. So I don't need to be another option. But to be able to do that while I'm just playing a game with a buddy and create these deep theological conversations while we are like, going through, the depths of this game, collecting all 108 characters, casting spells and blowing stuff up. It was really cool. So I guess the story here is this, and my hope for all of you as you're listening is to understand that God can bring us out of, I think, difficult times in very special ways. And just as Israel used stones to remember that moment without making these stones what they worship, using these stones as symbolism, I think that any way we can get through a season and we can have a way to look back at that season and we can say like, every time I see that, it reminds me that God's got me. And for me, every time I play through Suikoden, it is this beautiful reminder that there is this little dude who didn't have it the worst, had parents that absolutely loved him, but had his own difficulties and his own challenges. But this game is just a reminder that, like, man, God, you had me that whole time. You had me that whole time. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful to be able to play through it again, remastered. Hope that some of you give it a shot. I'm grateful that my buddy got to play through it with me. And I'm grateful that I get to share it with you here today. So my prayer is that you too would find ways of remembering the seasons that God has pulled you out of. And if you're in a season right now, would you reach out to me or someone from Love Thy Nerd and just say like, hey, I'm in a season. I need that thing. And if you are a follower of Christ, may your distraction be Jesus. And if you can't find yourself to get into the Word, I pray that he puts a song or a piece of art or a beautiful scenery near your home, or a story or a book, or he puts something in your path that just reminds you that he's got you. If that's a video game, I think that'd be pretty rad. And I'm glad you get to enjoy that experience. But when we go through these seasons, lastly, let us remember that it's not these games that change us, that impact us, that leave a mark in our life. Sure, they certainly can be a tool that God uses. But that's the power of the Holy Spirit. And that is God saying, like, I am bigger than all things. I created all things. Nothing that has been made was made without me and my doing. And it is mine to use how I please. And God, thank you for using Suikoden to speak to me, your child whom you love. Love you all. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us as we grow the library of satellite stories. We'll see you next time, and don't forget, Jesus loves you, nerds.